Hello, I am Wyatt Walker, and I just wanted to say that I apologize for missing my actual presentation time. I totally thought it was tomorrow, but it's not. So yeah, but okay. And thank you for letting me turn it in late too. Um, so my culture that I chose was the Western Woods Cree, and they're kind of like a Native American culture in the in Canada, and I'll get more into that, but I'm just kind of introducing them here. And it was kind of hard to find much information about this culture. I don't know why. I think they just haven't been studied much. I, I couldn't find much information past 1970. So, their location, um, they occupied the subarctic from the Hudson and James Bay, which is kind of like north of Michigan, kind of. Um, yeah, and all the way to the Peace River in Canada, which is like very far west in Canada. And I found it interesting because I wanted to study a culture that was like living in a colder area, and like from my opinion, this is really cold. Like the long cold winters are negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and that kind of just led to them not having much agriculture or limited or interactions with other cultures. And the name Cree is derived from the bands between the Native American, the culture bands between the Lake Superior and the Hudson Bay, and they didn't have much interactions with other cultures, but when they did, it was with the Europeans, and they were affected by the diseases as like a lot of other Native American cultures were in the late 1700s. And like I said, I couldn't find much information on them. So as of 1970, there were approximately 40,000 members of the population. But I don't know. I feel like that is. I hope that has grown. I feel like it has, although it was only 40,000 in the 1970s because Canada liked to introduce a bunch of laws that took away land from Native Americans and other things like that. And yeah, this is just more into more into their location. Is kind of I kind of wanted to show the whole range of where they like lived. So there's the Hudson Bay and the James Bay on the right, and they went all the way to almost all the way to the west, which is the Peace River in Canada. And on the first map on the left, you can see where the Hudson and James Bay are too, right above the Great Lakes. And this is my first like aspect that I wanted to study. Originally, I want to say food and history, but I changed it to history and marriage because I found that marriage was a lot more interesting and there was a lot more written about it. So, yeah. So their first relations were with those that were Athapascan speaking, which is just that language speaking of Native American cultures. So, and the Inuit. But yeah, that was near the Hudson Bay, and they did not have good relations until the 1800s. But the earliest contact with Europeans was in the 1600s, which also makes me question why didn't they get the diseases until the 1700s? But I think that probably just has to do with the fur trade and stuff like that. But yeah, the earliest contact were in the 1600s. The French were near Lake Superior in the 1640s, and the English were near Hudson and James Bay in the 1670s. I think the French were exploring Canada, and the English actually had military. Did the military exist in the 1670s? I don't know, but they were basically military bases near the Hudson and James Bay in the 1670s. And yeah, so the French were exploring, so they reached the Rockies by 1751, which led to the start of the fur trade. And the fur trade actually had a really big impact on the Western Woods Cree. as we will see in a little bit here. But yeah, the fur trade economics actually started to coincide with the end of violence between the Western Woods and the Athabascan speaking groups, which is like they were hostile until now. And but I think to succeed economically for them, they had to be in good relations so they could trade and work with each other. Um, yeah, so there was no violence until Canada later decided to put a bunch of laws restricting Native Americans and what they could and couldn't do, and then they kind of turned on each other. But yeah. So this is kind of just a map of Canada and all of the more western and northern, northern cultures that were in Canada at the time. So yeah. And the fur trade had a lot of consequences on the Western Woods Cree. So, since it was such a cold area, the Western Woods Cree liked, well, they didn't like to, maybe they did like to, but they had to hunt game and fish for much of their sustenance, for what they could eat. So, when the Europeans started to come through, and they started to come through and they needed to eat, so they killed off the animals that were there, and it was basically competition between the Western Woods Cree and the fur traders. So they actually started to run out of food, so they had to move west more to have more food. And but there was a lot of intermarriage between the fur traders and Western Cree, because the Western Woods Cree actually saw it as they saw it as highly desirable to be able to have a daughter that marries into a successful fur trader family. But yeah, in the 1870s, the treaty making began in Canada, and where they tried to take away tribal lands in return for reserves, and we know how that goes in America. But the Western Cree didn't agree, which led to some violence, and oil was found on their lands, which led to more violence because Europeans want to take land, Native Americans don't like giving up land. Yeah, this is just where oil was found, kind of in the like where they lived. So it was actually just found closer to the Peace River, which is where they had to move because they had to move west more. Yeah. So yeah, I studied some of the marriage stuff, and it was, like I said, it was common for them to marry into fur trader families, but when it wasn't, it was often between opposite sex cross cousins, which like families liked that because they could arrange that, and there was marriage with parallel cousins, but that was prohibited, and the cross cousin marriage established and maintained a relationship between hunting groups because they needed to have a strong hunting group to be able to sustain themselves. So the cross cousin marriage was good for that. So there were the leveret and sororette were practiced by the Western Cree. So if someone participated in sororal polygamy, it was seen as a representation of the woman's parental approval. So they're like, yeah, we like this dude a lot, so we'll let him marry all of our daughters. And sibling pairs would also get married, which would establish better relations between hunting groups and make them stronger and stuff like that again. Yeah, it was either two brothers to two sisters, or a brother and sister to a sister and brother. And people loved this. It was seen as exceptionally good because it strengthens hunting and bonds between families. And this is just a few pictures of the families. It was pretty hard to find anything about them and about their families, so this is this is all I could find here. But yeah, like I said, it was desirable for a daughter to marry an important fur trader, but something interesting is after marriage, the families would be matrilocal, which only lasted until a child was born. And while they were matrilocal, the groom would hunt and do services for the bride's family. And after childbirth, they became patrilocal. Um, yeah, and marriages used to be the very informal. Um, they used to not do much. They used to just be like, "Yep, we're married." But now they're conducted in Roman Catholic or Anglican churches, which I thought was a possible syncretism or like a pressure from other cultures to kind of submit and like obtain what the other cultures do, like because it's more in parentheses normal. Yeah, like I said, it was very common for just fur traders in general to marry indigenous women, but they would often gain the rights to the woman, and it's so the family would gain the right to sell fur at like posts and other areas along the fur trading route. And the conclusion, the Western Woods Cree had has not had much research done on it for the past 30 years. Like I said, I couldn't find anything from 1970, so it's pretty much for the past 50 years or so. And they actually existed 300 to 400 years before the fur trade started, which I thought was pretty interesting because I feel like that's a pretty long time to just be there and then have your land taken away. But they boomed during the fur trade. Like they expanded economically and socially during the fur trade, but they also competed with Europeans and fell short of many things like food during the fur trade. And their marriage was a lot different than what we see as conventionally normal, because they had polygamy, and a lot of us do not agree with polygamy or find it normal. But yeah, that's all I have to say about the Western Woods Cree.